Corbin Burnes has made his free agency decision, and unfortunately, he is not coming back to Baltimore as he signs a 6-year deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks. We'll break down his time in Baltimore, why he didn't choose the Orioles, and where the O's go next for starting pitching. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Saturday, December 28th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk all about Corbin Burnes because late in the night, Friday into Saturday, it was reported that he had made his free agent decision, signing a 6-year, $210 million deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks, making it official, at least for now, Burnes will not be coming back to Baltimore. I wanted to break it down from all the angles. First, just a recap of Burnes' 1 year with the Orioles and how successful he was. We'll talk about why he chose the D-backs and why not the Orioles and all the factors that went into that. And then finally, where the Orioles go next, because they were in this pursuit to bring Burnes back. They didn't get him, and it still feels like they need a top-of-the-rotation starting pitcher. Where are they going to get it? We'll discuss further those options at the end of the show. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So the news broke overnight. Wasn't the best thing to wake up to on Saturday morning, but here it is. Corbin Burnes has signed with the D-backs, and I generally wouldn't do a weekend episode for a signing that did not involve the Orioles, a player signing with another of the 29 teams, but Burnes was such a big-ticket Orioles free agent, was such a big part of their team in 2024, and the Orioles were involved in the pursuit. They were one of the handful of teams trying to get him this offseason, and they were reportedly in it until the end when he chose Arizona. And I think that's a big enough deal to do a Saturday episode because, quite frankly, the O's now have a gigantic hole to fill officially. I mean, the assumption was that he would sign elsewhere, but the O's were in the mix. But now it's official that they have a giant hole to fill at the top of their rotation. So I'm going to break it down, talking about just his time with the O's. We'll start with that. Then why he chose Arizona and not Baltimore and what that means for the O's. And finally, where they turn next for starting pitching. But let's just kind of start with the Corbin Burnes trade and him being in Baltimore, because at least for now, it's official, obviously. He only spends 1 year. The Orioles traded for him back on February 1st, sending DL Hall, Joey Ortiz, and a compensation draft pick to the Milwaukee Brewers for Burnes, who had 1 year remaining of arbitration until he was set to hit free agency after the 2024 season. And when the Orioles made that deal back in February, they knew there was a good chance they were only getting Burnes for 1 year. And despite that, they were willing to give up Joey Ortiz and DL Hall, who were both top prospects, who had both already debuted with the Orioles and could have been big pieces of their success moving forward, plus a draft pick. We know how much Mike Elias loves a draft pick, but they were willing to part with that because of how much of a difference Corbin Burnes could have made. And a difference he did make. 32 starts for Burnes this year. He pitched 194 and a third innings to lead the Orioles to a 2.92 ERA and a 3.55 FIP. Now, his strikeout rate continued to drop. It was down to a career low 23.1%, but he also posted a 6.1% walk rate, which was his lowest since 2021. Opponents hit just 225 against him, and he still did a fantastic job this year, despite, the ERA being low, but, the strikeouts being down. He still did a great job of avoiding hard contact. 31.6% hard hit rate against Corbin Burnes this year was in the 95th percentile. Average exit velocity was good. He still got a 33% chase rate outside the strike zone. That was one of the best numbers in baseball. You couple that with a good ground ball rate at 49%, a low walk rate. He was still an elite starting pitcher. He was an all-star. He started the all-star game for the American League. He finished in the top 5 in AL Cy Young voting. I mean, it was still a fantastic, fantastic season for Corbin Burnes. And quite frankly, the trade was obviously worth it, even though the Orioles only got him for 1 year. Now he is in Arizona, and the O's have a hole to fill again. I would do that trade 100 times out of 100 coming up again. He was incredible himself. And then on the other side, like, yes, DL Hall had shown some nasty stuff, but we were pretty much at the point by the end of 2023 that it looked like if DL Hall was going to have success in Baltimore, it was going to be as a reliever. Now, Milwaukee tried him in the rotation again. He once again got hurt. He once again was up and down. Still a lot of questions around DL Hall. At that point, I think he was going to be at best a really good reliever. Joey Ortiz had a solid little debut in the big leagues, couple of stints with the Orioles before the trade, and turned into a really good player for the Brewers. Had a better first half, really tailed off in the second half for Milwaukee, but they lost Willy Adames. There's a good chance Joey Ortiz is their starting shortstop in 2025. But there were a lot of questions about how does Ortiz fit in Baltimore? Because if all goes well in 2025, you're looking at an Oriole infield of Jordan Westburg at third, Gunnar Henderson at short, and Jackson Holliday at second. And it would have been hard to find a place to play Joey Ortiz because although he's been good, he does not have the skills or the ceiling of any of those 3 players. So it would have been tough to kind of pigeonhole him in to the Orioles lineup every day, and it made him a little bit expendable. And then the draft pick, it was hard to part with, but you knew that at the very worst, if you lost Burnes, you could offer him the qualifying offer and get a draft pick back. And at the very worst, the Orioles are going to get that because the O's offered Burnes the qualifying offer and he turned it down. And then he signed for more than $50 million, $160 million more than $50 million. The Orioles will receive an extra compensation draft pick. It will be somewhere in the 30s, so it'll be right after the first round in the 2025 draft. So basically, they give away those 2 players and they swap a 2024 pick for a higher 2025 pick in the draft. And at the end of the day, that trade, you do it 10 times out of 10. Every single time you have the chance to go get a true ace like Corbin Burnes, you do it. And really, he was everything the Orioles asked him to be this year. He stayed healthy all season, right? He pushed 200 innings. He made 32 starts for the 3rd consecutive season. He is an absolute workhorse. He was incredible in the postseason. One of his best starts of the year, he pitched into the 9th inning, allowing just 1 run against Kansas City in game 1 of the wild card series, doing everything the Orioles asked him to keep them in that game. Unfortunately, they didn't score a run and lost that game 1-0. It was not Corbin Burnes' fault. He was awesome against that Kansas City lineup. And even with the bad August, the one little stint he had where he struggled, right? He posted a 7.36 ERA in August. He gave up 21 earned runs in that month. And you were looking around like, what in the world is going on? He allowed 34 hits in 25 2/3 innings in August. We were trying to figure it out. Well, he made some adjustments. He brought back the sweeper. He changed the shape of his cutter, took a little bit off. And what did he do in September? Oh, just post a 1.20 ERA in 30 innings down the stretch to finish off the season and then cap it off again with 8 1/3 innings of 1-run ball in the postseason as well. So the ability to see struggles, have a lower K rate, and still adjust to be dominant, I mean, that's everything you can ask for. And he seemed to really like being with this organization, with this group. He certainly helped out the young starters. He loved going out there every day. The Orioles seemed to treat him well. He treated Baltimore well. And he gave the Orioles the true ace. And this is no disrespect to the great 2023 season that Kyle Bradish had. And I think if he does come back healthy at some point late this year from the Tommy John surgery, looking like his old self, he could be an ace of this Orioles rotation moving forward. But Corbin Burnes gave the Orioles something they hadn't had since Mike Mussina left almost 25 years ago, like a true workhorse number 1 ace at the top of their rotation that other teams would fear. They just had not had that for over 20 years, and Burnes gave them that other dimension at the top of their rotation. If the Orioles hadn't suffered all the injuries they did, I mean, we were dreaming on a top 3 of Corbin Burnes, Kyle Bradish, and Grayson Rodriguez healthy throughout the season. Now, that never happened because Bradish and Rodriguez both missed significant time this year, and it ended up being a Burnes, Eflin, Kramer I guess, combination by the end of the top three of their rotation. It was great that they brought in Zach Eflin to fill one of those roles at the deadline, but Corbin Burnes was the steady presence that was always there, being a true number one, mixing with his stuff, turning into a different pitcher, right? As he was age 29, he turned 30 in October. He was losing a little bit of the stuff. The K rates were going down, but he found a way to still be an incredible pitcher. And that's why, I know people are worried about the stuff going down a bit, the K rates going down. Can he be the same dominant Corbin Burnes that won the Cy Young and was maybe the best pitcher in the National League for multiple years? There are certainly questions surrounding that, and questions coming up like, should the Orioles give him $200+ million if things are declining? But what he showed me is, even without the nastiest stuff, he's still throwing a 97-mile-per-hour cutter, and it's the best cutter in baseball among starting pitchers. And he was able to tinker with his delivery and his velocities and his stuff to still be that good, despite not having the same K rates that he used to when he was a little bit younger. That gave me the confidence that if you did bring him back for 5 or 6 years, he could still be that good for the majority of that contract. It didn't happen, but it was totally worth it, that trade. And salute to Corbin Burnes for everything he gave the Orioles in 2024. A 10 out of 10 best trade Mike Elias has made, best move he's made since taking over as Orioles GM. And I hope it goes well for Burnes in Arizona. But again, just a fantastic year for him in Baltimore. And it was quite awesome to have a true number one ace at the top of the Orioles rotation, something I really had never seen that I could remember in my lifetime as an Oriole fan. But you move beyond that, you say, Connor, there's all those great things. The Orioles should have been all over it and brought him back on a long-term deal and got him back at the top of this rotation. And I agree with that, but it didn't happen. He is an Arizona Diamondback. So coming up next, tell you why he's in Arizona, and also more generally why he's not back in Baltimore. That's after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways to pick up a W. You can bet on which players will score a touchdown or how many points each team will score. It can be thrilling. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So Corbin Burnes is officially no longer a Baltimore Oriole. On early Saturday morning, signing a 6-year, $210 million deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks. It does include an opt-out after year 2, so after 2026. He could decide to become a free agent again, but for now, he will make $35 million per year for the next 6 seasons, or at least the next 2 and potentially the next 6 seasons with Arizona. So the question becomes, why sign with the Diamondbacks? They were never seen as a true frontrunner in these sweepstakes. The recent reporting had the Toronto Blue Jays and the San Francisco Giants giving out the best offers, and they apparently had offers sitting on the table for weeks now for Burnes, and we're kind of waiting for a decision. And it seemed like, at least still at this point, the Mets, the Yankees a little less because they had signed Max Fried, but they were initially in there. The Dodgers were initially in there, but they got Blake Snell. But it seems like the Mets, Red Sox, and Orioles were also at least in it in some capacity until the end, until Saturday, when Corbin Burnes made his decision, at least according to the reporting, and there had to be a couple of teams out there on the fringes as well. And there's been a lot of questions since this move has been made, like why the Arizona Diamondbacks? Like, yes, it's the team that went to the World Series in 2023. They had a fantastic offense in 2024, but their pitching struggled, had injuries. They took a step back and kind of blew their playoff chances, missed out by a game on really the last day of the season, so did not get back to the postseason despite winning the National League pennant in 2023. But this is still a young, very talented team with a very, very good offense. And now they've got Corbin Burnes atop their rotation to pair with the likes of Zach Gallen and Eduardo Rodriguez and Brandon Pfaadt and, whichever of these, Merrill Kelly and whichever of these Arizona starters that you like. He really kind of pulls this team all together. But as Orioles fans, we also knew that, and the reporting around the deal has been the number one reason why Burnes signed with Arizona. That is home for him. Corbin Burnes is from California. He's a West Coast guy, and it seemed like he wanted to go back to the West Coast. But specifically, he lives in Arizona. His family lives there. He's bought a house in Arizona. And his newborn twins and his young son all live there with his wife as well. And we know he had those twins born during the season this year. And they were born shortly before the All-Star game. And he was picked to start the All-Star game for the American League. He went to Texas, pitched the first inning, started the game, and just immediately got on a plane to Arizona to spend those remaining, 2+ days of the All-Star break with his family, with the newborn twins. And it seemed to be something that was weighing on him, that he really couldn't be there as much as he wanted to because they were in Arizona and he was in Baltimore across the country throughout the season as his wife was dealing with a young kid and also newborn twins as well. And he seems to be very much a family man. That's something that's really, really important to Burnes. And you could always tell that a little bit of him wanted to be in Arizona. And this has not been reported yet, but the tea leaves seem to read that, like, if the money was right, Arizona was his number one preferred destination. So he could be at home with his family. And now he signs with the D-backs. He gets to live in Arizona with his family, not just in the offseason, but also in spring training because it's right there in Arizona, and also throughout the season because he's right there with the D-backs. That is something that you can't really beat with a lot of other offers. If that's something that's important to you as a player, being able to be at home year-round can be really, really important for a guy that's moving into his 30s and has a family and has young kids. Like, that's something that sometimes money can't beat. When the numbers are getting to $200+ million, at that point, you're making life-changing money for not just you, but your kids, your entire family as well. Maybe another 30-40 million isn't going to swing you from being able to live at home throughout the entire year. That is a huge, huge factor in this decision. And yes, like, money talks, not just in baseball, but across the country, across the world, in any organization, money talks, and everybody's got a price. And I do believe that there's a number out there that another team could have offered Corbin Burnes to get him to not sign with the D-backs. I don't think it was like, as long as they offer me anything competitive, I'm going to Arizona. Like, there were numbers that even if this deal were on the table with the D-backs, I think if somebody offered him $300+ million with opt-outs, he would have signed with another team. Like, there were chances for the Orioles, for the Mets, for the Giants, for the Blue Jays. Like, it was out there. But this is also a large factor. And you got to understand, these guys are humans. Like, yes, they're making millions and now hundreds of millions of dollars in Corbin Burnes' sense. But they are still human beings. And they still make decisions based on not just money. Money is a large, large factor in all of these decisions that guys make, but it's not the only factor. I mean, this is such small potatoes, what maybe you and me go through in these work decisions, but I've mentioned I have a 9-to-5 job outside of this podcast. I have not a very fun commute to that 9-to-5 job. It can be 45 minutes to an hour, and sometimes coming home, bad traffic, it can be more than an hour, and that can weigh on me from time to time. I do like my 9-to-5 job. I really do enjoy the people that I work with and what I get to do, but that commute really lays on me. And despite the fact that I like my job, if I was offered a job 10 minutes down the street from here in Baltimore where I live, even if it was a lower paying job, if I thought I could still have success there, it would still be a good enough fit, and it was only 10 minutes down the road, for me, being closer to here, to my family all the time, getting home from work quicker, less of a commute, like, that's what's important to me, I would scoop that job up in a second, even if they were paying me less money. And that might be confusing to my current employers, saying, why are you taking another job for less money and stepping away from a job you really like? That is what is becoming more important to me as I, maybe continue to commute this hour plus. And it's a different conversation, but it can be similar for what Corbin Burnes is going through. All indications point to he really enjoyed his time in Baltimore and his time with the Orioles. And he said that multiple times. And that is why he, I think, entertained the Orioles as they were involved in these discussions trying to bring him back. But at the end of the day, he wanted to be in Arizona. That seemed to be number one on his list, to be with his family. And some of the reporting around it shows that there were bigger money offers on the table. Now, we're unsure if one of those was from the Orioles, right? Like maybe they offered like 3 years, 150 million, and they were just like big money upfront, shorter term. Would you do it? And nothing ever leaks out of this O's front office since Mike Elias took over. So it's really, really hard to know if we'll ever know what exactly the Orioles offered to Burnes. Hopefully we do find that out at some point this offseason. But the reporting from Bob Nightingale today was that, hey, the Orioles were aggressive in their pursuit and they were in it till the end. And that's nice to hear, obviously. But you just don't know it. And for Burnes, the equivalent of liking the job that's far away is, hey, he liked the Orioles. He liked his time here. But that doesn't surpass even more money. It seems like doesn't surpass the ability to be right by home. And I wouldn't be surprised if that Giants offer was, 7 years, 275 million. That Blue Jays offer was 8 years, 300 million. And he took 6 years, 210 from the Diamondbacks because they gave him what was most important. And that's going to piss off some of these other teams who had bigger money offers out there for Burnes. But it's a good reminder that these guys are human. And at some point, the Orioles may have just been out of the equation because of that. And they were still in the conversation because he just pitched for them and seemed to have a great time pitching in Baltimore. That allowed them their foot in the door in these negotiations. But what it seems like, and from the reporting, is that Arizona, because of what was important to him, always had the leg up. So I kind of put down like 5 factors as it pertains to him potentially coming to Baltimore in this entire situation with Corbin Burnes as he signed with the D-backs. One is Baltimore's just not where his family is, and he wanted to be in Arizona, and that seemed to be the number one factor here. So as much as the Orioles could have thrown at him, they can't be in Arizona. They play in Maryland, and that was a big factor here. Number 2 is an unfortunate part of free agency, but a lot of players, and this doesn't just go for Baltimore, but a lot of players don't see Baltimore as a desirable city to live in. Now, there's a longer conversation about why they see that, what kind of media certain players, white American baseball players, are consuming that feeds them that without even being here. And I don't think that's as much the case for Burnes because he just played here for a year. So it's a little bit different than a free agent who has never really played in Baltimore. But that seems to be an issue with San Francisco right now. There's such a negative connotation for a certain group of players around playing in San Francisco that they're sending out these gigantic offers and are getting declined by players, sometimes for less money, to go and play elsewhere. The third thing is, like, at least the Orioles are competitive, right? We're getting reporting that they were in on Burnes. We had reporting that the Orioles were one of the 4 finalists for Blake Snell before he eventually signed his deal with the Dodgers earlier this offseason. Like, that is good to hear. That's something the Orioles have never been even involved in, those reports that, hey, they were in it till the end for this big name, big money free agent. That is at least a change that seems to be happening under David Rubenstein, is that the Orioles are willing to give out these bigger offers and be in play for these big free agents. That is a positive moving forward, obviously. But also free agency is a two-way street. And that's something you got to realize that, again, even if you're offering the most money, and I'm not sure the Orioles did, but I have a feeling the Giants and Blue Jays offered more money than the Diamondbacks did for Corbin Burnes. But it is a two-way street. And these players also have to want to play for you as well. It's not just a two-way street in trades, like, hey, another team has to agree to the trade. Free agency too, that player has to want to come here. But the fifth and final thing on that list for me, flipping it to the other side, is that at some point, as the Orioles, with David Rubenstein and the new influx of money and the new ownership taking over, it's been nice they were willing to do the Zach Eflin trade and commit $18 million to a player next year. It's good that they were willing to give out a multi-year deal to Tyler O'Neill. It's good that they were willing to just jump the market on him and overbid some other teams for Gary Sanchez and Tomoyuki Sugano to get them here. But those are still smallish potatoes moves. Sanchez and Sugano, 1-year deals. O'Neill's a 3-year deal, first one given out by Elias, but it has an opt-out after year 1. So it could end up being a very short-term commitment for the Orioles. At some point, years and money-wise, you got to step up if you want to play with the big boys. Again, you can it might be a smarter tactic to not do this. The Astros, in all their success with Elias and Sig there and after, like, never really have given out the big long-term free agent deals, and they found themselves still with 2 World Series championships in the last decade. Like, they found a way to win without doing it. I get that, and the Orioles are very much modeled after some of the things that the Astros did. So I totally understand that. But more times than not, at some point, you just got to step it up money-wise. And I say this a lot, but every free agent deal that is 3 years or more, and that's, most of the good players in free agency are getting 3 years or more on their deals. Any free agent deal 3 years or more is just going to be an overpay. Looking at dollars per WAR, looking at what you're projecting out for performance, like you're always going to have to overpay for any free agent. Sometimes 2 years or more, but definitely 3 years or more, you are overpaying. That's why the Orioles are totally fine with a lot of 1-year deals because, yeah, you might overpay a little bit, but you're not. It's 1 year and then it's off the books. Like that's not a big risk at all. Free agent deals are risky and they're mostly overpays. But at some point, you got to step up and do it. And I know I just got done saying that it's a two-way street and there were other things important to Burnes. This isn't even a conversation at this point just about Corbin Burnes anymore. Like, yeah, it's incredibly disappointing that Burnes will not be back in Baltimore, but this is a wider conversation as well. Everyone, I think, has a price, even if they are special circumstances like Burnes, where he is really committed to doing one thing, and that's going back to Arizona if he gets even a competitive offer. Everyone has their price. And maybe for Corbin Burnes, it was like, hey, you got to give me $300+ million to get me to not choose Arizona. Maybe the O's backed away from that and just said that's not worth it. And I totally understand if that ended up being the decision for the O's. I get it. But moving forward for other pitchers and other free agents, not just this year, but years beyond, at some point, you got to step up, put your cards on the table, and offer someone big years, big money where it doesn't exactly make 100% sense, and maybe it's not the quote-unquote smartest thing to do, to be able to play with the big boys, to compete with what the Dodgers are doing, what the Yankees are doing, even what teams like the Padres have done, even with teams like what the Phillies did to turn things around. You have to step up. Even teams like Texas, who just gave out the giant money to Seager and Semien, and it turned into a World Series in 2023. You're going to have to step up and do some of these things at some point. And again, I love the influx that Rubenstein has given the Orioles, but they still haven't stepped up and made that big move. And at some point, even with all the other factors besides money that play into it, everybody's got their price. And the O's are going to have to step up and not just meet it, but exceed it with somebody to get this team, I think, over the hump to the next level. But at this point, there's not really a player left in free agency to do that with. So where do the Orioles turn next if they want to top the rotation starting pitcher? We'll get to that to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, maybe not baseball tickets being bought very soon on Game Time, but basketball, football, hockey, get it all at Game Time. Or maybe, I'm going to see a comedy show tonight on Saturday. It's not all baseball all the time that I'm buying tickets to. If you want to see something other than sports, well, Game Time Picks, the curation makes it easier to save more on not just sports, but concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So to finish things off on this Corbin Burnes signs with the D-backs episode, we talk about, okay, what is next for the Orioles? Because in terms of those free agents out there and trying to get a top of the rotation starter, which I think the Orioles need to do, they've gotten Sugano. You're looking at a rotation of Eflin, Rodriguez, Kramer, Sugano, Povich right now, either Povich or Albert Suarez in the number 5 spot. That's fine with depth-wise, and you've got Chase McDermott and Trevor Rogers and, the other of Povich and Suarez and Brandon Young behind him, but I think you need another arm that falls into the top 2 or top 3 spots in that rotation. Like, I don't know if I feel good about Dean Kramer as your number 3. He's more of a really good number 4 or 5. I still think they need a top of the rotation guy to really solidify this. Like, yeah, Kyle Bradish could be back, but probably not until September. It's more of a 2026 thing. Like, yeah, Grayson Rodriguez could take that step to be an ace, of course, but can you count on him being healthy? It hasn't really happened yet for a full season. They still need a horse at the top of this rotation, a guy that really instills fear every 5 days to opponents. And now this list is something I showed on the podcast earlier this week, but these are the left-handed starting pitchers who are still out there if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Andrew Heaney, Kyle Hart, Jose Quintana are the best three out there. Those are not ace types. I'm not sure the Orioles are going for any of those guys. Here are the righties who are left out there. Obviously, Corbin Burnes was number one on that list. He's gone. Nick Pivetta, I really like the stuff, but the Orioles have said not the Orioles have said, but it's been reported that the Orioles are maybe scared away by pitchers with the qualifying offer because they'd have to give up a draft pick. Nick Pivetta is one of those guys. I don't see the O's signing him. Jack Flaherty, next available on the list. Showed top of the rotation type stuff, had a great year with the Tigers and Dodgers last year. Reporting has been that the Orioles are open to a reunion with Flaherty. They knew he was kind of just tired and worn out at the end of 2023 when he did not pitch well after being traded to the Orioles at the deadline. But I'm just not sure Jack Flaherty wants that reunion. And there was some stuff that happened. I think it's better for both sides to not bring Jack Flaherty back. So then after that, you've got Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer and Charlie Morton. They're not the pitchers they used to be. A lot of injuries. And then like Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn. Like you're not getting, I think, realistically for the O's, the top of the rotation guy from free agency anymore. So at this point, I think it turns to a trade. You've got the likes of potentially Dylan Cease, Luis Castillo, Framber Valdez, Pablo Lopez. I mean, maybe Roki Sasaki is still a possibility. We're not going to know his decision for a couple more weeks. Hasn't seen a report yet that the Orioles have gotten a meeting with him even. We'll see. I'm holding out hope, but it doesn't seem likely that Sasaki signs with the O's. Obviously, it's a possibility still, but the trade seems to be the most likely avenue. And maybe what they did with Corbin Burnes, like trading some players who were good but not crucial to the team to get Burnes and get an ace for 1 year. And then at the very least, you give him the qualifying offer and you get a draft pick back and you try to re-sign him. Like maybe that's the plan going forward, right? You trade for a guy and basically force him to be in Baltimore for 1 to 2 years. He pitches well. He's on a winning young team. He sees the good development. He sees the good coaching staff and he likes it here. And listen, Corbin Burnes liked it here. He just had the extenuating circumstances of why he really wanted to specifically play in Arizona, and he got the deal there that he wanted, even if it was for less money than some other deals that were out there. So maybe at that point, that 1 year, those multiple years are enough to convince him to sign an extension, or at the very least, test free agency, but then be open and willing to re-sign with you as a free agent. Now, you still have to be willing to spend and meet what that player is worth, what that starting pitcher is worth. We don't know for sure that the Orioles are willing to do that yet. But, Pablo Lopez could be that guy. Now, he's got 3 years left, which is very, very helpful. Maybe Framber Valdez. The Astros have said they're not really shopping him at this point, but the right offer could go get him. Maybe Luis Castillo, who could have 4 years left. He's not the same pitcher he used to be, but still could be a really good piece in a top 3 of your rotation. Or maybe Dylan Cease is the guy that this exact plan could work with a little bit better. Cease is an ace-type pitcher. He's not Corbin Burnes. He's maybe a little half step down from Burnes, but still is an ace-type who could be your number one. He's got just 1 year remaining until he hits free agency. His team seemingly wants to shed some payroll, doesn't plan to re-sign him, wants to get something back for him. So you make a similar deal. It'll probably cost a little bit less than Burnes would. But maybe Cease can work with this full plan because he is from the East Coast. Now he's from Georgia and he has like businesses down in Alabama and stuff. So not exactly from the mid-Atlantic, but he's from the East Coast. He's, I don't think, married, so he's not at the point in his career where he's looking to start a family and settle down a little bit more. So maybe a little bit different priorities. Now, you never know if these guys want to be close from home or far from home or what their exact priorities are. It's different for every player. Again, they are all human beings, so what they factor in, what they put at the top of their list, besides money, of course, is going to be different for every guy. And you don't really know till you bring him in. But maybe this plan can work for Cease. Maybe you can get a deal done with the Padres to bring Cease over. He is a Scott Boras client, so I'm not sure he would immediately just sign an extension, but you get him in Baltimore for a year. He pitches well. The O's have more success. They get to the postseason. He says, you know what? I could see myself in Baltimore for 4 or 5 more years, and maybe the Orioles can get a deal done this time next year in free agency to bring a guy like that back. Maybe that is the plan moving forward if they're not going to shell out these big-time deals for pitchers because, and it makes some sense, like, pitchers break down, they get hurt. It's a big risk to give out big years and big money to starting pitchers. And a lot of the murmurs and reporting around Mike Elias has said that he's maybe not willing to give out these giant long-term deals to starting pitchers as they enter their 30s. Like, it makes sense to have that line of thinking, but at some point, you got to get a little more risky to put a big-time pitcher at the top of this rotation because the drafting and the trading, even if this is the plan, can only work for so long. Like, you start to run out of resources. But at this point, this offseason, I think the O's are done with free agents. I think it's going to have to be a trade. Now, again, The Corbin Burnes trade happened in February last year. We're only on December 28th. We're only about halfway through the offseason. There's still plenty of time. It is not time to fully panic at this point. But free agent-wise, your best guys that realistically I feel like could be in Baltimore are gone. And this does put the O's at a little bit of a disadvantage because other teams now know, hey, the O's are still looking for an ace. And there's really not anybody out there as a free agent, so they're going to have to trade for it. And that allows teams to drive the prices up on the Orioles a little bit, which is unfortunate. But they put themselves in this situation by not being willing to meet or exceed the deals to get one of these free agents. So here they are, and we'll see what they do next in terms of probably trying to trade for one of these top of the rotation starting pitchers that I still think they really need before this 2025 season starts. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in here. Hopefully made a Saturday episode worth it. A reminder that we're doing a giveaway here on the podcast for surpassing 8,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you all so much for helping to do that. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a 5-star rating and a review. That really, really helps out the show. But we're giving away an Orioles Hawaiian shirt. There it is right there. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, this is what we are giving away. To enter the contest for the Orioles Hawaiian shirt, you need to do two things. One, subscribe to the Locked On Orioles podcast on YouTube. If you're already subscribed, great. Check on number one. Number two is leave a comment in today's video or any video earlier this week or any video up until January 1st and tell me what was your favorite Orioles moment of 2024. Did a cool episode yesterday with Paul Mancano of the Baltimore Banner where we drafted our favorite Orioles moments of this year, so you can get some inspiration by checking out that episode. But again, subscribe on YouTube, leave a comment about your favorite Orioles moment of 2024, and you'll be entered to win the Orioles Hawaiian shirt. We'll do the drawing for the winner after the new year. But that'll do it for today's episode. Because I recorded today, TBD on a Monday episode at the latest. I'll be back on Wednesday with a little New Year's Day episode with our first opening day roster prediction for the Orioles for 2025. But of course, if we get any other news, I'll be back right here before Wednesday. But either way, until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.